The silence of the archive was James's sanctuary. It was a world built of paper and ink, of catalogued histories and forgotten stories bound in leather and thread. Here, the only sounds were the soft rustle of turning pages, the gentle hum of the climate control system, and the quiet, rhythmic tap of his own fingers on a keyboard. In the archive, no one expected him to speak. No one rushed him for an answer. The silence was a comfortable blanket, one he pulled tight around his shoulders every morning and reluctantly shed every evening. His life was a meticulously constructed routine, a fortress against a world that moved too fast and demanded words he no longer possessed with ease. The 5:30 a.m. alarm, the lukewarm coffee brewed in a pot older than his last tour, the careful knotting of the soft, gray wool scarf around his neck, regardless of the season. The scarf was his most essential piece of armor. It hid the geography of his pain, the physical map of the moment his life had fractured into a before and an after. On the bus, he always took the single seat near the back, his gaze fixed on the grimy window, watching the city wake up in a blur of muted colors. He saw commuters yelling into phones, friends laughing over jokes he couldn't hear, the easy, fluid cascade of words flowing between them like water. For James, words were not water. They were stones he had to dredge from a deep, muddy riverbed, each one heavy and misshapen. One particular Tuesday began like any other. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the library was quiet. He was in the middle of digitizing a collection of letters from the Second World War, his focus absolute. The looping cursive of a soldier writing home to his sweetheart was a language he understood perfectly. It was a language of love and longing, of duty and fear, transcribed without a single spoken word. The day bled into late afternoon, and the time came to leave his sanctuary. He pulled the scarf a little tighter, a subconscious habit, and stepped out onto the bustling city street. That was when the carefully constructed silence of his world shattered. Ahead, outside a small coffee shop, a young woman, a barista judging by her stained apron, was backed against the shop's front window. A man in an impeccably tailored suit, his face contorted in a mask of arrogant rage, was jabbing a finger in her face. His voice was a whip, sharp and cruel, lashing out over a supposedly botched coffee order. "Are you an idiot?" the man boomed, loud enough for the entire street to hear. "Or just incompetent?" I said, "No foam. Is that concept too complex for your tiny brain to handle?" The barista was trembling, tears welling in her eyes. People on the sidewalk hurried past, their gazes averted, a collective agreement to not get involved. But James couldn't. He was hardwired differently. In a past life, he had run toward chaos, not away from it. That instinct, buried deep beneath layers of trauma and quietude, still flickered within him. He took a step forward, then another. He came to a stop a few feet from the man, placing himself between the aggressor and the terrified young woman. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, a quiet, unassuming obstacle in a wool scarf. The man, whose name was Marcus Thorne, a real estate mogul known for his aggressive tactics and volcanic temper, whirled around. "What do you want?" "Get lost." James met his gaze. He opened his mouth, the words forming slowly, deliberately, in his mind before he tried to give them voice. "Leave her alone." The sound that came out was thick, slurred. Each word was a struggle, a physical effort that tightened the muscles in his neck. Thorne's face, already red with anger, twisted into a smirk of derision. He mimicked James's speech, elongating the words in a cruel parody. "Lave her alone? What are you, her slow-witted boyfriend?" Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at James. But the barista's fear was more potent than his own shame. He stood his ground, his expression unchanging. He simply shook his head. "I'm not going to be intimidated by some vagrant," Thorne spat. He shoved James hard in the chest. James stumbled back a step, his feet steadying him almost instantly. His training was a phantom limb. It still reacted. He put his hands up, palms out, a universal sign of de-escalation. "No trouble." "Oh, I think we have some trouble," Thorne sneered. He shoved James again, harder this time. What happened next was a blur of motion. Thorne, seeing that James wouldn't be provoked into a fight, decided to create one himself. He lunged forward, but in his rage-fueled clumsiness, his expensive leather shoe caught on an uneven piece of pavement. He flailed wildly, his arms pinwheeling, and crashed to the ground with a theatrical groan. By the time he was scrambling up, a police car was already pulling to the curb, its lights flashing silently. 2 officers stepped out. One of them, a burly man with a hardened face and a name tag that read Miller, took one look at the scene. The weeping barista, the immaculately dressed man dusting himself off, and the silent, scarf-clad man standing impassively. He made an instant judgment. "He attacked me," Thorne bellowed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at James. "This lunatic came out of nowhere and assaulted me." Officer Miller's eyes landed on James, cold and dismissive. "Sir, I need you to explain what happened here." James tried. He pointed to the barista, then to Thorne, trying to form the sentence that would untangle the lie. He was yelling. The words caught in his throat, a frustrating jumble of sounds. Miller's patience was non-existent. He rolled his eyes. "I don't have time for this. Did you or did you not put your hands on this man?" James shook his head, then nodded, the contradiction born of an inability to explain the nuance of the situation. "Yes, I put my hands up. No, I did not attack him." But all that came out was a frustrated sigh. It was enough. For Officer Miller, for Marcus Thorne, for the rapidly assembling story, it was enough. James was placed in handcuffs, the cold metal biting into his wrists, and pushed into the back of the patrol car. As the door slammed shut, he saw Marcus Thorne giving the barista a look of pure triumph, a silent warning. The truth had just been arrested. The legal process was a nightmare of misinterpretation. James was assigned a public defender, a young, overworked but sharp lawyer named Sarah Jenkins. In their first meeting, she saw what everyone else saw. A quiet, possibly troubled man who struggled to communicate and was facing a credible assault charge from a powerful city figure. "James," she said, her tone patient but strained. "I can't help you if you don't tell me what happened. The police report says you were the aggressor." He sat across from her in the sterile interview room, his hands resting on the table. He spent 10 agonizing minutes piecing the story together, his voice a low, halting rasp. He pointed to his jaw as he spoke, a gesture she didn't yet understand. Sarah listened, her brow furrowed. His story was plausible, but Thorne's was pristine. He was articulate, charismatic, and had no criminal record. James, on the other hand, was now in the system, and his inability to speak clearly made him seem, to the uncharitable eye, evasive. The prosecutor, a man named Davies with a reputation for sharp suits and sharper rhetoric, certainly saw it that way. In the preliminary hearing, he dismantled James with cruel precision. "Mr. James," Davies began, his voice dripping with condescension, "you claim you were merely helping, a noble sentiment. But why, when Officer Miller questioned you, were you unable to provide a coherent sentence? Was it because you were fabricating a story on the spot?" James gripped the edge of the witness stand. "No, it is hard to speak." Davies let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Hard to speak? How convenient. It becomes difficult to speak just at the moment you're being questioned about a violent assault you committed in broad daylight." The courtroom, a small collection of clerks, officials, and a few observers, let out a few stifled giggles. The judge admonished them, but the damage was done. James felt the walls of the lie closing in around him. He was being painted as a monster, and his own voice was a broken tool, useless in his defense. That night, Sarah Jenkins went home defeated. She believed James, but she knew how this would look to a jury. It was the word of a wealthy, well-spoken pillar of the community against what? A man who couldn't defend himself without sounding guilty. She sifted through the meager file on her client. Honorable discharge from the Marine Corps. A few commendations. Nothing extraordinary. But something about his gesture, the way he had pointed to his jaw, stuck with her. It wasn't a gesture of frustration. It was an explanation. She called him the next day. James, your service records. You were honorably discharged. Was it for medical reasons? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then a single raspy word. Yes. What was the injury, James? She pressed gently. More silence. She could hear his strained breathing. Jaw. A light flickered on in her mind. Was it a combat injury? Yes. James, she said, her voice now urgent. Is this why you struggle to speak? The affirmative that came back was quiet, heavy with years of unspoken history. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The prosecution wasn't just misinterpreting him. They were mocking the very evidence of his sacrifice. This changed everything. I need to know what happened, James. I need the full story. I need to know if there were witnesses. Anyone from your unit. Reluctantly, he gave her a name. Sergeant Michael Corrigan. He didn't know where he was now. They had lost touch, as soldiers often do, scattered by the winds of civilian life. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah became a detective. She pored through veterans' databases, made dozens of calls, and chased down cold leads. She knew the trial was a ticking clock. Finally, she found him. Michael Corrigan was running a small horse ranch in rural Montana. She called him immediately. The man who answered had a voice that was calm and steady, the kind of voice that could command respect in a firefight. She explained the situation, who she was, and why she was calling about James. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind on the other end of the line. Then, Corrigan spoke, his voice thick with a sudden, fierce emotion. They're doing what to him? They're laughing at him? His speech is being used against him, Sarah confirmed. The prosecutor is calling it convenient. Corrigan let out a string of curses that would have made a drill instructor blush. When he was done, his voice was dangerously quiet. That man isn't just a soldier, ma'am. He's a hero. The reason I'm alive to talk to you right now is because of what happened to his jaw. What happened next was a story that Sarah Jenkins would never forget. Corrigan told her about a dusty, sun-scorched street in Fallujah, about an ambush, about his four-man fire team pinned down in a narrow alleyway, taking heavy fire from a rooftop. They were trapped, outgunned. We were dead, Corrigan said, his voice raw. No way out. Then James, Private James back then. He did something I've never seen before or since. He laid down suppressive fire while the rest of us pulled back to a better position. He exposed himself, deliberately drawing their aim. Sarah listened, captivated, her pen flying across her legal pad. He saved us, Corrigan continued, gave us the 30 seconds we needed. But he paid for it. He took a round to the face. It shattered his jaw and ripped through his throat. I was the one who dragged him back. I held him while the medic worked on him. The last thing he tried to do before he passed out was give me a thumbs up. Sarah was speechless. Does he still wear a scarf? Corrigan asked suddenly. Yes, Sarah breathed. All the time. He's hiding the scar, Corrigan said softly. He never wanted anyone to treat him differently. He never wanted to be seen as a victim. There was a pause. Ma'am, I wore a helmet camera that day. Standard issue. The entire firefight was recorded, including the moment James went down. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Sergeant Corrigan, can you get that footage to me? It'll be on the first flight tomorrow, he said without hesitation. You show that to the jury. You show them what a hero looks like. The day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was fuller now, the case of the belligerent businessman versus the silent vagrant having drawn some minor local interest. Marcus Thorne sat at the prosecution's table, looking confident and victimized. Officer Miller sat in the front row of the gallery, ready to deliver his damning testimony. James sat beside Sarah, his face a stoic mask, the gray scarf tucked neatly into his collar. The prosecutor, Davies, was in his element. He paraded Thorne to the stand, who gave a convincing, emotional account of the unprovoked attack. He called Officer Miller, who described James as non-compliant and suspicious. Then it was James's turn. Davies circled him like a shark. He repeated his questions, his voice laced with scorn, poking and prodding at James's halting speech. So, you're a hero now? Is that what you're trying to say? A vigilante? No, I was helping. Helping? Or were you looking for a fight? You seem angry, Mr. James. Is that why you can't get your words out straight? Because you're consumed by some inner rage. Each question was a fresh wound. The jury was a sea of skeptical faces. A man in the back row whispered something to his neighbor, and they both chuckled. The officer, Miller, smirked from his seat. James's eyes scanned the room, seeing only disbelief and mockery. He dropped his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. She stood up. "Your Honor," she announced, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "The defense has evidence that will provide crucial context for my client's character and his physical condition. We would like to play a short video for the court." Davies shot to his feet. "Objection. This is a simple assault case. The defense is trying to create a sideshow, to distract from the facts with irrelevant material." The judge, an older woman with tired but discerning eyes, looked at Sarah. "Counselor, what is the relevance of this video?" "It is relevant, Your Honor," Sarah said firmly, "because the prosecution has made my client's speech impediment the very centerpiece of its argument. They have mocked it, called it convenient, and used it to paint him as a liar. This video explains the origin of that impediment. It speaks directly to the testimony the jury has been forced to endure." The judge considered this for a moment, her gaze falling on James's slumped figure, then back to the smug prosecutor. "Objection overruled. You may play the video. The jury will decide its relevance." A large screen was wheeled to the front of the courtroom. The lights were dimmed. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then the screen flickered to life. What happened next silenced the entire room. The footage was chaotic, visceral, terrifyingly real. The sound was a cacophony of gunfire and panicked shouting in a language the jury didn't understand. The camera jerked wildly, showing glimpses of crumbling walls, dust-filled air, and the muzzle flashes of unseen enemies. The jury leaned forward, their casual amusement evaporating, replaced by a raw, primal tension. Then they saw him, a younger James, his face grim with concentration, his movements fluid and sure. He was shouting orders, returning fire, a soldier in his element. The camera, attached to Corrigan's helmet, panned as he and two others pulled back into a doorway. But James stayed put, laying down a sheet of covering fire. "James, get back!" a voice yelled on the recording. The camera focused on him, and in that horrifying, crystal-clear moment, the jury saw it. A spray of dust and concrete erupted from the wall just behind James's head. He recoiled, his rifle falling from his hands. His head snapped back with unnatural force. There was no sound from him, just the sickening impact and the sudden, awful stillness of his body as it crumpled to the ground. The camera fell, showing a frantic view of the dusty floor, and the audio was filled with a single, anguished cry, "Man down! Man down!" The video ended. The screen went black, but the silence it left behind was absolute. It was a heavy, profound silence, filled with the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. The giggles were gone. The whispers were gone. The smirks were gone. In their place was a wave of collective shock and dawning horror. Davies, the prosecutor, stood with his mouth slightly agape, his face pale. Officer Miller's jaw was slack, his eyes wide with disbelief. Marcus Thorne seemed to shrink in his chair, the color draining from his face. Sarah let the silence hang in the air for a full 10 seconds before she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the stunned room. "James," she said gently, "can you please tell the court what happened on that day?" James looked up, his eyes swimming with the memory. He swallowed hard. "We were pinned down. I had to..." He faltered, the effort too great. "It's all right," Sarah said. "You don't have to speak." She turned to him. "James, would you be willing to show the jury the result of the injury you sustained that day?" He looked at her, and for the first time, A flicker of something other than pain crossed his face. It was resolve. He nodded slowly. With the eyes of the entire courtroom fixed on him, James slowly, deliberately stood up. His movements were measured, almost ceremonial. He raised his hands, not in surrender, but with a quiet dignity that commanded the room. His fingers found the knot of the soft, gray wool scarf. He began to unwind it. Lap by lap, the fabric fell away, revealing the column of his throat. And then the scar. It wasn't a clean, surgical line. It was a jagged, brutal territory of puckered flesh. A deep, concave indentation that started below his ear and carved a vicious path across his jawline, disappearing under his chin. It was a permanent, physical record of a bullet's violent passage, a testament to a sacrifice no one in that room could have imagined. It was the reason for every halting word, every slurred syllable, every moment of misunderstood silence. A woman on the jury gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Another juror, a stern-looking man who hadn't shown a flicker of emotion all day, openly wept, tears streaming down his cheeks. The entire room shifted, not just physically, but fundamentally. The air, once thick with judgment, was now charged with shame, with respect, with a profound and humbling awe. James didn't look at the jury. He looked directly at the prosecutor, Mr. Davies, whose arrogant facade had completely crumbled, replaced by a mask of horrified realization. Then he looked at Officer Miller, who could no longer meet his gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor in disgrace. Finally, he looked at Marcus Thorne, who was visibly trembling. In that moment, James hadn't said a word, but his silent, scarred testimony was the most powerful statement the court had ever heard. The judge slammed her gavel down, the sound cracking through the stillness. "Case dismissed," she declared, her voice ringing with indignation. She looked pointedly at Davies. "And I will be speaking with the district attorney about your conduct in this matter." She then fixed her steely gaze on Marcus Thorne. "As for you, sir, I am recommending the district attorney's office open an immediate investigation into perjury. Bailiff, see that he doesn't leave." The room erupted, not in applause, but in a low murmur of conversation as the weight of the moment settled. James slowly, carefully, rewrapped his scarf, but the gesture was different now. It was no longer a shield to hide his shame. It was a frame for his honor. As he stepped down from the stand, people parted for him as if he were royalty. The woman from the jury who had gasped rushed forward. "We are so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for your service." The news of what happened in that courtroom spread like wildfire. The story of the silent veteran and his scar became a symbol. James was no longer the quiet, overlooked archivist. He was a hero, unmasked by the very prejudice that sought to condemn him. His life changed overnight, not because of fame or attention which he actively avoided, but because the truth was finally his. He received a formal apology from the police department, and Officer Miller was suspended pending a full internal affairs investigation. Marcus Thorne was charged with and later convicted of perjury, his reputation and business left in ruins. Prosecutor Davies was reassigned to a basement office handling traffic violations, his promising career permanently derailed by his own arrogance. But James wanted more than just accountability. He wanted to ensure no one else endured what he had. With Sarah Jenkins by his side, he started a foundation, the Scarf Project, dedicated to providing legal aid and advocacy for veterans with communication impairments caused by PTSD or physical injury. He turned the symbol of his hidden pain into a banner of hope for others. He learned that his voice, though physically broken, had never been truly silent. It had just been waiting for the right people to learn how to listen. His story became a lesson, a powerful reminder that the deepest wounds are often the ones we cannot see, and the greatest heroes are often the ones who walk silently among us. A scar is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to a battle survived. A halting voice is not a sign of a deceptive mind, but often the sound of a story that costs too much to tell. Before we judge the words someone struggles to speak, we must first have the courage to ask what silenced them. For in the quiet spaces between words, in the scars hidden beneath cloth, lies the truth of a person's journey. And that is a truth worth waiting for.